Just check your source.
Just put on default. Anyway, how are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm waiting for you to get your camera on. Get that squared away, and then because I either got to do show non-video participants and it shows Mark off to the side, or it's just my giant ass mug on the screen.
All right. I'll try to get this set up as best as I can. I don't know, maybe start virtual.
Oh, someone said beautiful giant ass mug. I appreciate that. Did you know that you're now free to dual stream Twitch and YouTube? I did know that. Two problems with that. While I kind of like the idea of dual streaming, there's a couple of issues that come up. Number one, pushes my computer to the limit. Number two, when you dual stream, you kind of split your audience. There we go. There you go. When you dual stream, you kind of split your audience.
I just turned OBS. I wasn't streaming on OBS, but I just turned OBS off, and now the camera is coming back up. I guess it's a whole separate thing with that.
Yeah, but OBS has that because you could use your green screen through OBS, right? And so OBS, if you go in your settings, there's something for it to export to like programs like Discord, etc. While you are young, so before we get started, okay, I want my chat. I don't fucking know anything about this, but a lot of people seem to know who you are, and I don't really know who you are, dislike you, and have some allegations. I don't want to just ride onto a debate with that hanging in the air, and I want to say that I take no side because I don't know anything. So I want to give you at least 30, 60 seconds to address that to whatever the audience is, and then we're gonna move on. And then in chat, meme all you fucking want. I don't give a fuck if you talk shit the entire time, but he deserves the right to be able to address any allegations if I don't fucking know anything about it.
The reason these Chris Nats are espousing these, well, he's a fucking genocidal warlord pedophile, it's because they don't want to debate me. I legitimately think that they cannot defend their epistemology, their religion, their worldviews in front of me, so they have to make up a character assassination to avoid me. Basically what happened is I got into a spat on Twitter with one of my friends on Twitter. I just followed her, and we just, talk occasionally. A Catholic, a really puritanical, a Chris Nat Catholic by the name of Cute Root, started some shit with her. And, we just got into our entire spat, and there's definitely context missing in BPF's allegations. So it's an entire rabbit hole in and of itself. And I'll make this expose so the Christnats can no longer, use that as propaganda against me. But I think our discussion was justified. I mean, it got raunchy, here or there, but I don't necessarily see what's so immoral about what I did or said.
Fair enough. Those are his words. Stay tuned to his channel, and he'll address the allegations in further on his channel. And I would like to also point out that terrible defense of yourself, sir. Maybe your video does great, but starting off with see the reason these Christians are against me. It's fucking terrible way to do that.
It's everybody, but
me. I'm just saying that was rough. It is what it is, but let us continue. So I don't remember, I talk shit on Twitter, right? I just meme and fucking talk shit on Twitter. I don't really give a fuck about Twitter. So I don't know what I said or whatever, but you DM'd me and you were like, dude, I want to debate you. And the proposition, as far as I know it, is that capitalism is exploitative. I didn't know who you were.
Coercive. I might have gotten the semantics wrong a little
Coercive?
bit.
Coercive changes a lot, but we can get into the nitty gritty of coercive because, what does coercive mean? Is nature coercive, etc.? And then at a certain point, you'd prove your position, but we'll get into it. You could easily prove that, but you don't. But by saying everything is. But regardless, so that's kind of what happened. Now people are like, "Oh, this guy's an idiot. Don't debate him. Whatever." I looked at one video of yours, right? You were debunking a debunk, which is already like, you know, peak content, right? Someone does something, then someone debunks it, then someone debunks the debunk, and you're like,
2016
cringe.
Gamergate moment.
Right.
Yeah,
It's cringe,
like,
the cringe there. But I was like, whatever, I'll check it out. And in it, you know, what I saw was you, I mean, you didn't give a good definition of labor theory of value because you didn't like explain the differences between like Das Kapital 1 and Das Kapital 3 and like marginal revolution, et cetera, et cetera. But you mentioned marginal utility. You clearly had a grasp of labor theory of value, at least in some respect. You clearly had a grasp of the economic arguments that they were making. And you clearly were able to identify that the attacks that they were making were trash attacks, some of which because they're just kind of like moralistic callings to the pro-capitalist side, and some of which because it's just talking about surplus value from a Marxist perspective and not not labor theory of value.
Are you referring to the Smithians video or Ubersoy's video? Because
I think it was like 10 or 11 days ago. Whichever one that was. Like I looked for the first one that wasn't like hanging out on stream and was like a video essay.
Yeah, Theron could have made some, you know, a much
Theron, I think that's what it was.
Yeah, and what he did was essentially appeal to, you know, the capitalist justification for, you know, substituting their labor instead of, you know, what has to do with prices, and that is the essence of the labor theory of value. I just found his critiques to be irrelevant and, you know, not substantive.
I was like, I saw that and I was like, yeah, this guy seems like, you know, we could have a debate or a conversation about this. So you take umbrage with the fact that I am staunchly capitalist, that I am essentially the most capitalist the capitalist can possibly be by being an anarcho-capitalist. And so I want to hear why you think I'm wrong, because there's no moderator, right? So this is obviously going to be a little bit more free form, but I want to hear what it is that you think is wrong about my position. And if you can sprinkle in there how you're not a communist throughout this, you know, then maybe we can figure something out, because I don't see the difference. but yeah, like give me your argument.
Well, do you want me to touch first on why I believe
I want you to make the strongest argument possible.
Why my system is better. Why I think my system is better.
Well, you're coming to me with the proposition, right? Yeah, so if you want to get into like a comparison of systems at a later point, that's fine. But the first thing is you're saying capitalism is coercive, right? And so what I want from you is that argument. And obviously in that argument, I want to understand what your definitions are for capitalism and what your definition is for coercion, so that we can pick apart whether or not I agree or disagree with your position. And also, you know, if I disagree, like tell you why I think you're wrong.
Yeah, so I believe to be capitalism, to be an economic system involving, obviously, capital investment and private ownership of the means of production, wage labor, and generally the profit motive. We can, you know, really get into the nitty-gritty of this, but in essence, it's ownership of the means of production to reproduce profits every quarter. Maybe it's in the form of a dividend or a buyback, whatever that firm uses. I believe the CCP to be state capitalist, but I don't believe them to be socialist, as I truly think the delineation between socialism and capitalism is when the workers are making all private property subservient to their interests, rather, and providing for their needs. In terms of coercion, I, in pretty much every circumstance, find that as an extenuating factor that would otherwise make a choice free. Obviously, that can apply to many things, and I'll explain how I do believe some coercion is justified to some extent. So where would you like to go with this?
So, like, I don't like your definition of capitalism, right? Because your definition of capitalism, I think, lacks any utility. Because the only system, so under your definition of capitalism, basically every communist regime would be capitalist. Every liberal democracy would be capitalist. The only places that wouldn't be capitalist, right, would be anarchist, some small relative anarchist communes, and like extreme extreme control of the entire market economy, such as like North Korea. Even under your definition, Stalinism would be like a form of capitalism, other than the name of like saying the private property doesn't exist.
Because I really don't feel any society has truly represented the interests of the workers. Social capitalist, even liberal societies, this is mostly because they use nomenclatura systems, and it's just a new way. Well, speaking to Eastern Bloc communism specifically, it's just a new way, I believe, for ruling classes to disguise their interests.
Okay, but again, that doesn't address the issue with you saying that capitalism is essentially a market economy that isn't 100% state controlled, right? That you make no delineation between fascism, the CCP, America, Iceland, etc. If all of these things are capitalist, right? Yes. And that's your definition of capitalism, then like I would say more often than not, by your definition of capitalism, capitalism is coercive, because you just included throughout history, right? Like essentially every market economy since the Industrial Revolution with relatively few exceptions. And what this does is this frames the conversation, right? Where we get into an empiricist debate, which I don't want to do because I think empiricism I'm an Austrian, right? So I'm going to think it's stupid anyways. But we'll get into an empiricist debate. You'll bring up this, and then I'll be like, here's why that's not capitalism. Here's why that's not capitalism. Here's why that's not capitalism. And then eventually we get to some example that you have knowledge of that I don't have knowledge of. And then you're like, look, I got the dunk on him here. When really what it is, the problem is that you have a poor definition. At least in my approximation. So let me give you my definition of capitalism, right? And see if that like shores up something, or if we can come somewhere in between. So what I would say is that capitalism is the ownership of private goods, the ownership of which is determined by homesteading and voluntary transactions, where the distribution of commodities, price, and production, so in production I would include labor, land, and time, right, as elements of production, are determined by a competitive free market. Now, that to me is capitalism, right? Everything other than that to me is some state intervention that is capitalistic, right? It's close to capitalism. It has some tendencies of capitalism, but it's not actually capitalism because it's a mixed economy.
I'd go as far to say, not every transaction is voluntary. As a matter of fact, I think you could make the argument all transactions aren't voluntary. For instance, this is especially, yes, this is especially patent, not patented, that's a different process. In circumstances which involve labor, obviously you're not going to just rot here and starve. You've actually got to go out somewhere into the world and work, or work.
Yeah, that's the human condition of the human species.
But is it not coercive?
Okay, if that's coercive, everything is coercive. Nature is coercive. Humans are coercive. All economic systems are going to be inherently coercive. If your definition of coercion is that there's scarcity, right, in resources, and that we don't live in a post-scarcity world, then everything is coercive and your definition is meaningless.
I think coercion is justified to adequately accommodate for human need. Okay.
Well, then define coercion.
Well, as I stated previously, an extenuating factor that makes it to where choice would be free otherwise. I mean,
so you would say that a tsunami is coercion. A hurricane is coercion. It's an extenuating factor that takes away individuals' ability to be free because they have to flee their home because a hurricane's coming, right? So you're saying that nature, like rain, fire, lightning, earthquakes is a form of coercion, and that the earthquake is actually anti-liberty. Like you see how your definition doesn't make any fucking sense?
No. Anti-liberty, that is a process of nature. Well, I mean, humans are a form of nature. Like, everything is natural. And that's another reason why I'm opposed to fossil fuels, like fracking and all this, because
yeah, but all that's irrelevant. All of that's irrelevant to the question I asked, which is that, like, if your definition of coercion is one such as we live in a world with scarce resources, and there are environmental pressures, be they from nature, be they from other humans, etc., and that any environmental pressure that causes a human to act differently is a form of coercion, then the word coercion is just a word that describes the human condition and is meaningless to say capitalism is bad because it's coercive, because what you're saying is capitalism is the natural state of human beings. And I would say that that is a naturalistic fallacy in favor of capitalism, and you're actually arguing for capitalism by the definition of your own word. So are you pro-capitalist?
No. I think coercion can apply to virtually everything. But what a socialist and or communist system specifically entails is allocation of commodities based on human need, and even more left-wing of this system, including mine, have subsistence labor abolished. I mean, you believe in the non-aggression principle, right? Well, okay, I think here's a much better line of inquiry. Like, obviously, I agree with you in that coercion can apply to a multitude of various circumstances.
No. I'm talking about your definition. I think coercion. Requires personhood and will. I think in order to coerce someone, right? That when you use the word colloquially as coercion, you cannot be talking about natural phenomena or environmental pressures, right? What you have to be talking about is aggression towards another individual, that you're attempting to modify their, threaten to modify their behavior, right?
We do drastically affect the environment with what we do, and two, personhood is involved.
That's
necessary for labor.
That's not an argument against what I said, though. Like, what I'm saying is that I think coercion requires personhood, and that personhood enacts its will to aggress upon another person via threats to attempt to change their behavior, essentially making the transaction non-voluntary. No, I'm not. Explain to me how I'm describing labor.
Okay. Yes. You are aggressing upon a person. Well, not aggress, but it's coercion because it's an extenuating factor that does not make the choice voluntary. I mean,
no, now you're going back to your definition that we already realize has no utility. Like, so if I'm describing something and I'm prefacing it with my definition, then what you're doing is you're straw manning me by supplanting your own definition again as part of your argument. So make the argument from my definition as to why I'm describing labor.
Well, your argument is basically hinging upon apathy. I do believe it's some form of aggression to just let people starve. Let me ask you this simple question.
How's that?
Do you believe apathy is immoral?
I mean, it depends upon the circumstance, what you mean by that, but from a libertarian natural law perspective, there's nothing illegal about apathy. How is apathy or inaction, also as the Catholics would define passive action, right, a form of aggression? Explain to me how an individual, right? Because what you're saying is an individual must act. If they do not act, this is a form of aggression against another person. But see, the problem is where does the must act come from? The must act means that there is an impetus, either some enforcement mechanism, right, of some sort, where an individual attempts to coerce that individual into the supposed responsibility of action. So your definition of morality requires a violation first of the non-aggression principle, and I would say it just falls flat on its face there. Inaction and passive action are not forms of aggression.
I don't think the non-aggression principle adequately describes what you need to do to be.
Well, then you don't get to change the definition of something to say that something is a violation of a definition that you then change. Like, that's just subverting the definition to meet your own argument, which is just simply not how that works, right? Like, you're gonna have to stick with you can't use a word and then as you're trying to explain why I'm wrong about the word, change the definition of the word from your kind of Marxian lens, right? Like, that's not how that works. I'm gonna nail you to the wall to stick to your definitions. But you can make an argument, if you would like, about like why you think passive action or inaction or the feeling that an individual has in their mind is as apathy, not caring for the plight or suffering of others, is in effect aggression, which is force and violence or threats of force and violence against other person to stop their freedom.
Because it's making them beholden to your will. So say we live in monopoly.
How is apathy forcing someone to be beholden to your will? You're literally describing an individual that has no will in the situation to begin with.
I was about to describe it. Okay, so
I will let you go. I'm sorry. I'll shut up. I get mad at fucking commies, dog. But I'll be quiet. I'll behave.
Okay, so let's say I own everything. I've suddenly become a capitalist. Oh, you've converted me, man. But we live in a monopoly in which I own everything.
So you own the world?
Mm-hmm.
How the hell did you do that?
Effectively. I don't fucking know.
I'm just not going to, I don't engage in hypotheticals that don't match reality.
I'm a good entrepreneur.
No, it just doesn't match reality, right? Like an individual that owns all of the property in the entire world is essentially an impossibility. So I don't feel the need to engage in an analogy that doesn't match reality.
The setup to test the non-aggression principle, sir.
Exactly. So, which means it needs to maintain the principal elements of the world in which we live in order for it to be accurate.
I'm going to explain why apathy can sometimes be aggression. Okay, so let's say I can pretty much automate, pretty much everything I want to. But I'm obviously willing to hire some people. Now, them being jobless means they just starve, okay? But my ownership of that property makes them beholden to me because they rely on me for subsistence, do they not?
I mean, in the analogy that I refuse to negotiate with, in which you own the entirety of the world, I told you, it doesn't match reality. In reality, right? Like in reality, you have an evenly rotating economy. Like even at best case scenario, you have an evenly rotating economy. In a worst case scenario, right, where the prices in competition are perfect and price is only inflationary, right? Like there's no profit that exists in an evenly rotating economy. So that's your utopia,
the
right?
Monopoly example.
Right.
Let's just scrap the monopoly.
Yeah. All right.
Example.
Yeah.
Well, let's apply it to modern day. There's nothing more realer than, modern day because this is the world we live in. So obviously people are beholden to capitalists, to businesses, to provide them subsistence and to keep them living alive. So you have to give, on average, because this is for most workers, a third of your life you have to spend working, retire, and just to maintain yourself day by day. I generally view that as a form of aggression, whereas my system proposes, okay, well, we've just done away with.
Your example was to prove that it's a form of aggression. Then you said that capitalists exist, people need to eat, therefore people work to eat, right? And because of that, that's a form of aggression, but you haven't explained how it's a form of aggression. You've just
stealing my life is what I'm saying.
What have I stolen?
My time?
How have I stolen it?
The autonomy?
In what way have I stolen it? As the capitalist, right?
I'm entirely beholden to you. Subsistence for living.
No, you're not.
Subsistence.
No, you're not. Name a place right now where you're beholden to a single capitalist.
I'm beholden to markets.
So now you're beholden to the existence of humanity existing in a market economy. Okay?
That's
what you're saying?
The market economy. Yes, that's what socialists want to do.
Right. Okay. So again, automatically I would just say positive rights don't exist, and this is a silly argument, because that would require you to enslave other people.
Rights do. I'm a man-made law theorist generally.
Well, I believe in natural law and law that we can justify objectively, unlike laws that we kind of just come up with out of our ass, out of a consequentialist analysis. Yeah, objectively. You cannot argue against the non-aggression principle without running into the law of non-contradiction. So it's false to argue against private property, and it's false to argue against
but
self-ownership.
Labor is aggression. Labor under a market system is aggression.
Right, but you keep making the claim without. So what are you defining as aggression? Because aggression, in as far as the non-aggression.
Let me replace that word with theft. Theft of my bodily autonomy, my time.
Okay, so now we're changing it to theft, Okay, now, but that doesn't change anything. You're just attempting to use a synonym, right? So, but you're still talking about the non-aggression principle, but you want to use theft. Okay, so what is theft? What does it mean to steal something?
Involuntary removal of something somebody would rather have.
Okay, so involuntary removal of something someone would rather have. Okay, so now what you've done is in your definition, you've abolished the right of private property, right? Because now what you've said is that every time there is conflict over scarce resources, anytime someone loses that conflict, regardless of how it's lost, right? That is a form of theft. So two people want to drink this energy drink, right? And I say, no, this is mine. I was here first. Well, now what this is this is involuntary removal of something that someone else would rather have. You're now saying that I'm stealing something by drinking my own thing. Oh, so now theft only involves time? It doesn't involve property? It doesn't involve resources?
No, what I was saying is labor is theft of bodily autonomy and time. My system does away with subsistence. And
so
of course,
you don't,
yes, it's utopian,
you don't believe that you own your labor?
You need to perform labor. Obviously,
so do you own your body? You own labor. You own the right, the right to do with your labor as you will. To do with your body as you will.
Right to not work. Obviously, like, I own my labor, but I don't have the right to not work.
Well, those two are contradictory. You can't argue both of those at the same time.
Absolutely.
It's a contradiction. How can you own your right to labor and then say that you don't have the right to not be enslaved in labor to someone else, and then say that voluntary transactions that I have, that I advocate for, are actually the form of slavery? You just justified slavery, and then in your attempt to not justify voluntary interactions, you're a slaver.
Oh my God, dude. No. Okay. So slavery is involuntary ownership of another human being. Labor is the involuntary theft of a human being's time and bodily autonomy.
So hold on. If labor is in and of itself, right? That, right? And we're going to use, this is why I hate Marxists, because they fucking change words all the time. So what would be the other work? Would you supplant the other work with the term work and say that labor and work are two different things, and that the distinction of labor is the theft supposedly, or the aggression supposedly, of positive rights, and that work isn't labor? And then explain to me why that distinction is important.
Colloquially, labor refers to hard, arduous work, but for the sake of this conversation, I just keep them synonymous.
Okay, so if labor and work are the same thing, right, and an individual has a right to their own body and can freely do with their body what it is they do, they can engage in the abstract concept of labor voluntarily, and they can choose to do this for a sum of money and or benefits or barter. So how is that an act of aggression?
Starve otherwise.
Right, but we're going all the way back to your idea of coercion, right?
I'm forced to work.
Okay, so
been in Ancapistan because, you know,
you're forced to. You already said you're forced to work in your system as well, because you said you don't believe that you don't have the right to not work.
No. I said, as an end goal, subsistence is abolished and we've met all needs. All that shit is automated. So in my system, we can just pursue our own interests. And if that's
like, a post-scarcity world.
Yes, I want to get to a post-scarcity world. In Ancapistan,
if you're in a post-scarcity world, the entire conversation changes, because we don't live in a post-scarcity world. Post-scarcity world is a utopic fantasy.
So is Ancapistan, and that's what I'm trying to prove. So
your argument to me saying something is a utopic fantasy is, let me prove why I'm right by engaging in the utopic fantasy. I don't think mine is a utopic fantasy. I never claim any utopic dreams in anything. All I do is claim philosophical answers about what is and isn't aggression, and what we should do in terms of common law and natural law philosophy. That's not a utopic vision.
Okay, me needing to work for a living makes me pretty much entirely beholden to you for a really good chunk of my life. I mean, is that a succinct explanation?
No, because it's not true. Because you don't need to work for me. You have a labor market. You can work for a bunch of other people. You could become an entrepreneur. You could get a
not you.
You could get a loan. No, but you could literally go like capital, right? Capital and commodities. Like one man's capital is another man's commodity, right? Like they switch places. Right. So, but no, what I'm saying is like when you say you need to do this, you could literally have an idea right now, sit down with a fucking pen and notepad, your personal property, if you will, right? Since we don't like private property, you could go to the fucking bank and say, I have this great fucking idea. Right. And then they go, well, you don't have good enough credit. You can raise your credit score. You can do some things. You can become an entrepreneur. You can become the capitalist and you can hire other people. The idea that you are beholden to the capitalist class, right, is absurd even in our own coercive system.
Well, let's say I have too big of an ego to work for everybody else. Even if I'm becoming my own boss, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm still forced to work, to generate interest on that loan, am I not?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by forced to work. If you don't pay things that you voluntarily said you would pay, then you have to do it. I mean, like we have like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like you need food. How do you get food? Well, working is one way to get food. It's not the only way to get food, right? But it is one way to get food.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's aggression because your system and Capistan makes me beholden to either banker if I'm an entrepreneur or a boss if I'm working for somebody else.
Okay, so what is your definition of aggression now, as opposed to the libertarian definition of aggression? Because the definition of theft we already proved that you gave. You said, well, let's change it to theft, and then I already proved that your definition of theft is meaningless. But so like let's try again and let's get a definition of theft or aggression. Right. So I can understand what it is that you're saying, because what you're saying is unequivocally false unless you have a different definition of aggression. So I want to like lay out your argument, because I've yet to really hear how you just keep positing it is and then saying that like natural needs of the human exists. And you keep making claims on top of claims without making an argument as to why it's aggression.
OK, so defining aggression as basically force. Pretty much an extenuating factor that would make the choice free otherwise. The extenuating factor in Capistan being me starving, which makes me beholden to you.
Who says you starve?
You see how I view this as coercive, right?
I'm asking you for your definition, right? And
I gave it to you just now.
No, you're just saying that if first of all, you're making a false claim, which is that charity doesn't exist, family networks don't exist. You're making the claim that if one does not work, one will starve. That's not even
doesn't exist.
Because you're saying that one must starve, right? Basic deductive reasoning, right? A general principle down to a specific example, right? Inductive reasoning, right? Specific example to the general principle. If we use basic rules of logic by what you're saying that charity cannot exist. You're saying that family members can't feed other family members, right? Because you're saying one must starve if they don't work, and yet NEETs exist now, right? Like,
they exist on a commercial basis, so they're beholden to the same system.
What does that even mean?
Okay. Have to generate revenue so they can sustain themselves as a charitable entity. And this relies on labor. So,
okay. Well, yeah,
in the instance of charity, we're substituting somebody else's labor for somebody else's.
Labor is only one part of the equation. That's your problem here, right? Like all commodities, all goods and services require land, time, and labor, right? There's three major pieces of the equation. You're only talking about labor.
Saying, even in Ancapistan, it's still coercive. Like labor is why, pivotally why, Ancapistan is
Dude,
coercive.
do you realize you're just going in circles and you refuse to answer the question? How is it, right, that someone voluntarily chooses to work with another person to sell their labor?
It's not voluntary.
Coercion. How is it not voluntary? Explain that then.
Because there's an extenuating factor that would make the choice free otherwise. That being
so can you name
I don't want
okay
to starve now, do I?
Okay, so by virtue of your definition, we'll attack it from a different angle because I've already defeated your definition from one angle. So let me defeat it from another angle, right? Let me just show how it's flawed like every way that you look at it. Name an interaction then that is purely voluntary. And tell me why that logic applies in a way that this logic doesn't.
Pretty much every action we do is involuntary. Like, can you want to want something? No.
So now every action we do is involuntary. Every action is inherently aggressive. And now we can choose to do whatever acts of aggression or violence, coercion, or redistributive wealth or theft that we want because it's all justified because all actions are. Do you see how you're muddying the water?
There's coercion that does more harm than other coercion. So in my ideal system,
right now you get to do a consequentialist analysis based off of your subjective values of evil.
And maximize positive freedom. You maximize negative freedom. Now, in Ancapistan, people can do pretty much
No, I don't believe in positive freedom, period. There's no such thing as positive freedom because it's a contradiction. Positive freedom requires the taking away of freedom of others. Negative rights do not require taking away other people's rights. Therefore, only negative rights are true.
Yeah, let's talk both our end goals. So in my system, I've done away with subsistence and people can focus on whatever the fuck they want. Maybe this is the arts, I don't know, some shit like that. But in your system, people are forced to spend the majority of their time working. I mean, obviously, maybe some people have some paid time off. Again, that's the maximization of negative freedom. Oh, wait, you don't believe in that, but...
Right. Negative rights are the only rights that exist. How can a right exist that requires the violation of other rights? Negative rights do not require the violation of other rights. Positive rights require the violation of other rights. If they require the violation of other rights, then they're not rights. They're inconsistent. They're illogical. You cannot justify positive rights. Name a positive right. Name a positive. I mean, I'll repeat, but then I'll explain it, and maybe it'll be easier through example. But what I'm saying is that only negative rights can exist because in order to maintain negative rights, you do not need to violate the rights of other people. In order to maintain positive rights, it requires the violation of a right. So, right. Okay. But you don't justify anything. You just say things are.
Nope. My system, we get to choose what we want to do with our lives. Your system, we get to choose where we work.
No, you don't.
Working as under your system, we don't get to choose if we work as an
Does your system have taxation?
We're talking about
what's your system, right?
As an end goal.
So anarcho-communism, right? Yeah, private property doesn't exist, so it requires coercion. But you say it's okay because everything's coercive, right? And you say everyone gets to choose what they want to do.
Maximizing positive freedom.
But you're not maximizing choice.
I absolutely am. Positive freedom.
You're inherently taking away people's choice, and it's unjustifiable.
I view it as justifiable because we're abolishing subsistence. Do you get this?
Right, I get it, but you can view it as justifiable, but it's not. It's just logically
focus on what
a contradiction.
We want to do in Ancapistan, okay?
Yeah, I mean, like, look, if an anarcho-communist commune wants to live next to Ancapistan, right, and they have a single property owner, right, and in that single property owner buys that piece of land or obtains that piece of land, however they homestead that land, right? They go out and do that land, and they draft up a contract, right? And everyone that comes there must sign this contract that says these are the rules on this private property. We're gonna set up this council of elders to handle disputes. You know, we're gonna the private property owner will be, you know, an individual that is set on the council of elders every so often, etc. And we're gonna share all of the resources and all of the things. You want to set that up in a way that's logically consistent and voluntary? Be my guest. I'm all for it, right? But if you want to argue that capitalism is coercion based off of a definition that everything is coercion, and you want to argue for silly things like positive rights, I'm going to tell you you're wrong.
There's a level of coercion involved in everything. But in Ancapistan, we get to choose what we do with our lives. In Ancapistan, we do not. Because most people, newsflash, would rather not be working, now would they?
Right. What you're saying is scarcity exists, therefore this justifies whatever system I want.
Precisely, like taxation and a stronger social safety net. Yes.
Right. That's absurd, right? To say that because scarcity exists, that we can do any morally unjustifiable thing and people no longer have a right to self-ownership is a logical contradiction that you can't, that is false by logic. We don't even need to look at the evidence.
Self-ownership. If I'm devoting a third of my life to a capitalist, that's clearly not self-ownership. Obviously, like, I own the labor, but I mean, do I own the time spent? Do I own,
Well, again, I'll return to my definition
of voluntary association.
I'll return to my definition of capitalism, right? The ownership of private goods, the ownership of which is determined by homesteading and voluntary transactions, where the distribution of commodities, price, and production are determined by a competitive free market. So in a system that is capitalist, all of your interactions are voluntary, unless you are aggressed upon. And then that person needs to pay restitution for their aggression to no longer be branded a criminal. So really selling your labor is not right coercive.
Now. Okay. So if I put a gun to your head and, force you to work, there's an extenuating factor there that makes it to where nobody would even think to consider that voluntary. The factor that we're introducing in Ancapistan is that I'm going to starve if I don't work. Do you really consider that a voluntary transaction?
Well, first, a couple things. Number one, you put a gun in my head, I'm going to beat your fucking ass. Number two, you're saying you're making a distinction without a difference, because your claim is that the capitalist system is coercive because it requires people to work in order to feed themselves. And yet at the same time, you are also claiming that coercion is inherent in all of these interactions and that people under your system do not have a right not to work. Which is a right that you do have under capitalism. So therefore, by your own definitions, by your own words and your own logic, capitalism is less coercive than anarcho-communism. And so you've failed by your own definitions.
No, the reason that that's false is because, as I've been saying this entire debate, labor is theft, bro. Labor is theft.
Labor is an abstract concept that represents the sale, the transaction that you do, right? In exchange to the universal time preference, right? Like, you prefer goods now. The capitalist has the money and the investments and has low time preference. So they put in capital so that the same goods can be produced later, and they are paid based off of their interest, right? Which is the money that they put towards time, because there's a preference for things now as opposed to later. And there is also a preference towards market allocation of resources. They are rewarded or they are punished for the way that they allocate resources, right? So the capitalist and the laborer are engaged in a voluntary transaction. There's no coercion here.
There absolutely is, because
dude, your camera went pretty wild for a second, like static here, internet or something. Your audio seems fine though, so I just want to let you know.
Okay, you seem fine on my end. Anyway,
Discord gets wonky sometimes. I just want to let you know. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, okay, the reason I view labor as theft is because it's not exactly a voluntary association. There's an extenuating factor there, is there not?
The extenuating factor is of the human condition.
Ronald
as
Reagan.
You described.
Ronald Reagan.
You say that this applies to any and all transactions, period. If it involves in essentially all transactions, right, then it is a constant in our world. It's a constant. It's a constant in our world. So if it is a constant in our world, so long as we have scarcity, right, then there are only two options. We do something that leads to post-scarcity, which would obviously be capitalism, not communism, because the innovation under capitalism is incentivized. So the incentivization is towards innovation in capitalism, as opposed to against it in a communist system, or like we hit a magic button or AGI or something. But if it's a constant in our world, it doesn't matter.
Okay, the idea that there's innovation in a capitalist system just gets destroyed by the Phoebus cartel. But what I want to explain to you
The idea that there's innovation so you have your anecdote and that destroys the idea that innovation exists in capitalism. Please, but you were about to pivot away from that as if you were going to get some secret dunk, and this is the dumbest shit I've ever heard.
Because I want to explain to you the philosophical concept why labor, even as it exists under our current neoliberal framework, is, still very coercive.
There's certainly coercion. There's certainly coercion, like the National Labor Review Board that forces unions on companies, for example. That's an element of coercion against the capitalists that the state does that is, immoral, for example. There's elements of coercion in our system, like an American economy, but an American economy is capitalistic, not capitalism.
Okay. In my post-scarcity world, and you can call it a utopia if you want.
I just don't feel like engaging in a post-scarcity world. We don't live in one, and we don't have any evidence that we're going to live in one anytime soon.
We don't have any evidence we're going to live in Ancapistan anytime soon. So for the sake of intellectual honesty, I'm going to grant your endgame premise. That's false dichotomy, because one is presenting one is presenting a theoretical system to engage in the reality that we live in now, and the other one, your position, is specifically engaging in a reality, in something that is a non-reality or is a potential reality that we're unaware of if we'll ever be able to achieve. So no, that's not the same thing. Ever be able to achieve in Ancapistan, okay? So for the sake of intellectual honesty,
again, you're lying. You're lying, because Ancapistan is a theory about how we should deal with the reality we live in now, right? You're positing a non-reality. These are two different things.
Okay. Is a choice free if you could have done otherwise?
Is a choice free if you could have done otherwise?
Yeah.
I don't understand the question. Could you be more specific?
Okay. So, in my system, I guess you don't want to compete with that, but just bear with me.
No, I have a problem with competing with your system, just not your system placed in the utopia, right? Like fucking engage with the system as it is in the reality that we have today. Like grounded in the world we live in, not in a world that doesn't exist.
Has never, according to you, Types, has never manifested itself in a reality. So what I'd like to say,
I don't know how many times you're going to circle around this dumbass fucking point. I don't know if you're just stupid or if you're trying to get clips.
To engage with my world.
No, I'm not willing to engage in a post-scarcity world as a means of explaining economic principles and philosophical axioms of what is and isn't justified in the reality of the world we live in, which is a world that has scarcity. Like, don't fucking try and bullshit some clips so that you can make a 6-minute fucking video where you edit together and be like, look how I dunked on him. It's dumb. Engage with reality.
Earlier, I turned OBS off. Okay. So, if I'm forced to work, I starve otherwise, do you really think that isn't coercive? Yes or no?
Well, if you're forced to work, that's coercive. If you're enslaved and you starve, then that's coercion.
Okay, I'm forced to work because I would starve otherwise. Got that right?
I don't know what system that entails. That's not a system that doesn't exist in Ancapistan or an American economy as it is today. There are plenty of people who don't work, that beg for food. There are charities that exist. There are people that live off of their parents. There are people on Social Security, for example, despite them never having put money into Social Security.
Fine. Okay. So charity.
Welfare queens, right? Like, what are you talking about?
Let's talk about specifically Ancapistan. Charity pays for my life. Charities, even in Ancapistan, have to operate on a commercial basis. So obviously, they're substituting somebody else's labor for mine. I mean, if some really generous rich guy wants, lazy people to just smoke weed all day, that's all fine. But somebody has to substitute for somebody's labor. But that doesn't happen in a post-scarcity world. So
first of all,
better world, mind you.
First of all, you keep saying Ancapistan, right? And Ancapistan, and it's totally fine if you haven't dealt with a lot of ANCAPs, right? Like that's a meme It's not really what anarcho-capitalism is, right? Anarcho-capitalism is a descriptive legal philosophy and ethical philosophy of what is and isn't justifiable, right? But it's not necessarily like Ancapistan could be a covenant community, that Ancapistan could be an anarcho-communist community. Like you could be an ANCOM so long as you did so completely voluntarily and like signed a contract to live in said commune, right? So like when you say in Ancapistan, you're also talking about your system, right?
Yeah. No, because I'm not an ANCAP. What I'm saying is
but
that
what
I
I'm
truly do believe
no, I'm going to hammer you on this. You're allowed to live in an anarcho-communist commune voluntarily, right? So long as you have the contracts and so long as children that come of age have the choice to live there or not live there and you don't kidnap people, you're allowed to be in an anarcho-communist commune under Ancapistan.
I think the whole world should be ANCOM. Technically, I really call myself a DemSoc, but I've only developed ANCOM leanings recently. It's just that I believe...
Okay.
Yes, I believe that instances of coercion are justified to provide for our fellow human beings. And in a post-scarcity world, I think that's the ideal. That is what we should get to. You're just not willing to
two things
with that, I guess.
Two things. First of all, if you want to explain how you get to a post-scarcity world with anarcho-communism, totally give you that platform. Number one. Number two, the term you're looking for is anarcho-syndicalist, basically. Like if you're a DemSoc for strategic reasons to bring about anarcho-communism, you're basically an ANSEN. You should probably read more ANSEN literature.
Buddy, I don't give a fuck about optics much at all. So long as people are convinced. Obviously, that's a form of optics, but there are convinced.
I'm just helping you out. Read some more ANSEN literature.
Bag, I don't give a fuck.
What? I'm not talking about any of that. I'm just saying, like, when you're saying like, well, I'm a DemSoc, and you're basically talking about strategically, right? But like you have leanings towards ANCOM. Like I'm this isn't even a debate portion. I'm just like, dude, check out ANSEN literature. That's probably closer to what you are.
Sure. Okay. So the reason I believe capitalism to be coercive and not the ideal system is like what? Okay. 200,000 years ago, we were running around in the fucking jungle, beating ourselves over the head with, I don't know, fucking clubs or sticks or like rocks attached.
Presumably, I got some questions with Göbekli Tepe. All right. I don't know, man. I think we might've been doing some wild shit back in the day, but go ahead.
Sure. Whatever. And then very recently we landed on the fucking moon. I think that's a very, good thing. I feel like humanity's truly evolving. What we need to do now, in order to maximize positive freedom, which you obviously don't believe in, is to abolish subsistence. And I think if we use coercion to get there, that's justified because we do away with labor and do away with what we don't want to do.
Well, you can't justify justify aggression against people, persons, or property. Like it's an unjustifiable position. Number one.
You absolutely can. Okay, so
you can't. It's impossible.
Would you spend a cent to save the world? Let's say everybody is going to die unless you spend a cent.
Spend? Yeah, of course I'd spend it because the world has more value to me than a penny. How bad is inflation?
Inflation's pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, like how much is a penny worth at this point? You know what I mean? Like it's meaningless. It's a joke. But I'm just saying, like, obviously the world is worth more to me than a penny. The penny is actually worthless if the world goes away. This is a silly thing. Now, are you asking would I steal a penny to save the world? Is that what you want to know?
Yeah. Okay. Positive freedom and a post-scarcity world are more valuable to me than a scarcity world in which
you keep talking about a post-scarcity world.
Manifestation of Squid Game,
You keep talking about a post-scarcity world as if that's an inevitability, and I find this kind of hilarious. So, but
find the idea that you don't think labor is coercion hilarious. Yes.
Well, you think literally everything is coercion and that voluntary things don't exist. So therefore you believe that freedom doesn't exist and you claim to want to maximize positive freedom, which is like there's so many layers of contradictions that I've exposed throughout this that you're just being silly at this point. And we haven't even gotten into why it's impossible to, like, I don't think you're smart enough to go through argumentation ethics, to be honest. So like, I haven't really broached it, but it's not like I can now if you want to have your mind blown, but like, you're not capable of justifying aggression towards other individuals against their persons or property. But even if you were in some weird way, right? Your definitions require that voluntary interactions can't exist. Therefore, everything is justified. You're literally making Ivan Karamazov's argument when the Persian soldiers were stabbing a baby with a bayonet, saying, if God isn't real, then everything is permitted. Like you're basically you're Fyodor Dostoevsky's worst fucking human that could ever be.
It's easily debunkable because religion epistemically relies on circularity. Now, back to an actually relevant topic. So
that's not what I said. Like you just fucking tried to throw out some big words that don't address what I said. That's hilarious.
Post-scarcity world is less coercive.
Okay, but again, you're engaged. Okay, in a world where Merlin and magic exists, right? Communism works better. Maybe I've never met Merlin and I don't know what this magic is you speak of. So you either need to justify the inevitability of post-scarcity and why we should be moving in that direction because of its inevitability, or you need to stop engaging with fucking fantasy novels. We're having a debate about whether or not capitalism is coercive. We're not having a debate about whether or not Lord of the Rings or Star Wars is better in terms of their magic system because it's more accurate. Like either fucking justify the post-scarcity world or stop talking about it.
Okay. Here's my, big contention with this whole, positive freedom doesn't exist narrative. So, would you be taxed a penny to save the world? Because, okay, let's say we still live in this neoliberal society. It's that 1 cent that
there's no such thing as taxing a penny voluntarily to save the world. That's just spending a penny to save the world. There's no substantive difference. If you get a voluntary choice, then it's
okay.
It's just spending.
But let's say you can hide it. Let's say you can hide that one Abe Lincoln that you found under your fucking couch cushion. Would you give that to the IRS to save the world?
If I knew unequivocally that it would actually save the world to give the IRS 1 penny, then I would choose to spend the penny because I value the world more than a penny, especially since once the world is gone, the penny is meaningless anyways.
Hey, yeah. So you think
it's about higher ordered values and what I voluntarily choose to do, not about theft or coercion.
Yeah, you just made the concession right here. So, okay.
No, I didn't.
You think voluntary spending, taxation in this specific instance,
but it's not taxation.
It serves a net utility.
This is you literally changing the words of definitions again and then trying to use that as a dunk when all you're doing is lying.
Would you steal a penny to save the world?
Would I steal a penny to save the world? I've had this conversation multiple times. It's a much better question than the original 2 that you gave because the original 2 are silly. The answer is probably, if I'm honest, I probably would steal a penny to save the world, but I recognize that is an unjustifiable position that I'm attempting to work through.
Okay. So I believe there are instances of coercion. I'm a utilitarian, if you didn't fucking know. So
obviously,
I believe that there are instances of coercion that are justified to serve a greater net utility to humanity. You probably think that, do you not?
That it what? Could you say it again? Let me get the wording specific.
Okay, I think there are instances, justified instances of coercion that, serve a net utility to humanity. For instance, stealing a penny to save the world, Yeah,
but it's not justifiable. You may like it, you may do it, but it's not a justifiable position.
Wait.
It's impossible to justify.
This is the world we're talking about. Come on.
No, it's just literally impossible for you to justify.
Okay, let's say you're
like you can't do it.
He's just liquidated some stock, turned that into cash, and now, the world needs saving, but he's not willing to spend. Would you steal that one Abe Lincoln? Save the world?
What are you talking about? Like
justified?
No, it literally can't be. It's not a matter of think. It's just objectively false. You cannot justify it.
He can.
I don't get a choice. I don't get a choice to change the rules of logic. You don't get a choice to save the rules of logic. It's not logically justifiable. Therefore, it cannot be a moral claim that is true. It's just impossible to justify. You can say that that's what you want to do. You can utter the words, this is justifiable, but you're engaging in a performative contradiction. So therefore, it's impossible to justify.
It is very possible to justify, and that's the fact that you're saving the fucking world by just.
All right, let me explain it to you. Let me.
Okay?
I didn't want to get into argumentation ethics because, like, I just don't think you'll get it. But like, I'll explain it for the audience's sake and for your audience's sake, right, so that they can hear it.
I have much of an audience, me, but okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, I mean, I see you typing and laughing to other people. I assumed you were streaming, but if you're not, I don't. Fair enough. I have my audience too, and I'm sure some people are here to see you at some degree, right? So. Do you believe, yes or no, that we don't have to investigate logical claims that are contradictory? Law of non-contradiction in logic.
Are you asking me if I think we should investigate them?
No, like whether or not it is necessary to investigate the claims on their merits as opposed to the logic if the logic is contradictory.
I don't think the logic should be contradictory.
Right. So like if I say Timmy is 6 years old and 12 years old, we don't need to go investigate how old Timmy is. We know that the statement is false and it can't be true because a human being can't simultaneously be 6 and 12.
Determine how actually old he is. Yes.
I mean, if you want to determine the truth, that's fine. But we can say that that's a false statement because it's a contradictory statement.
This is utilitarianism versus objectivism. Like, okay, so where did you deduce that the idea that stealing a penny to save the world is
so you're going to run away from this? That's fine. We can run away from it. Just so if you're going to run away from it, then we'll just assume we'll assume that I'm right because you don't want to go through it. Okay, so you believe in the law of non-contradiction. We've established that. So propositional claims need to be logical in order for them to be true. This is also true of moral propositional claims because they are a subcategory of propositional claims, correct?
Morally and epistemologically, where do you justify natural law?
I'm literally doing it right now.
Okay, go ahead.
To be fair, right? Like that's what I'm doing, right? So you believe, right, in the law of non-contradiction, this also must be true of moral propositional claims to say that something is justified or that something is good or that something is bad. Because it's a propositional claim.
You have to morally justify actions pretty much all the time.
Right. So when you're engaged in argumentation with me, what you are doing, right, is in order but you are establishing the norm of non-aggression and self-ownership over yourself because you are choosing to use scarce resources, which is your mind and your body, as a means of engaging in this argumentation. So if you argue against the right of an individual to untrammeled, have their body coerced in some way, then you're engaged in a performative contradiction and the argument is unjustifiable.
Because I think anarcho-communism leads to less coercion net. Like, do you get that general idea?
That's not what I said.
Okay.
If you argue in favor of coercion, right, and non-voluntary means, and the ownership of people's bodies by the community or by others, right, you're engaged in a performative contradiction.
My end goal leads to the least amount of coercion possible. You understand at least what my position is on that, correct?
No, so what you're doing is you're using utilitarian calculus where your subjective bias is tabulating the information that you so choose, and then you're saying, see, I'm right based off of the things that I choose to look at, but you don't have perfect knowledge. No, you don't actually know that you believe that is the case.
But I know it's the case because that utilitarian calculus is objective.
You're God? You're an omnipotent, you're an omniscient being. You have perfect knowledge of the world.
Humans, but we deduce what is moral based on the harm it causes. So, for example, stealing a penny in order to save the world, like, I think that's a fundamentally good thing, but you think utilitarian calculus is bad in that instance because no matter what, Bezos is entitled to that fucking multi-billion-dollar fortune he has.
Well, the thing is that yes, you can't know that you're actually stealing a penny to save the world. It's impossible to know that.
Oh my God. Okay. You have good empirical evidence reifying the position that if we do steal this penny, it virtually most likely will save the world.
But you don't know that. There's nothing can be beyond a reasonable doubt when trying to determine what the actions will cause in the future.
But we don't know everything about the brain, but we still morally justify things.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously,
you can morally justify claims that don't engage in aggression upon other people or their property.
No, what I mean to say is that, like, humans aren't a binary. There's always going to be a semblance of doubt in something in terms of its epistemology. Yeah. So, okay.
Right. But logically, we can prove that one that argues against those things, right, is a performative contradiction and is an impossibility proof against the claims that they make themselves. So we can dismiss what that is not true. So when you advocate aggression towards people, or you advocate the theft or the destruction of private property, then I know objectively that that is false.
Wait, how? No. Okay. Dude. 7 billion people dying. If one guy doesn't, and a penny of the labor that has been generated into his.
All right. You really love this because it sings the ethos, or sorry, the pathos, right? You're loving this pathos argument right now, which is the emotional idea that someone would be so cold and callous.
The net benefit.
Right. That someone would be so cold and callous, right? But we can easily reframe this in a very much less charitable way, right? Like the classic trolley cart problem is even less charitable than what you're doing. Or if you take this logic out further, right, we could use the hospital bed example, right? A person comes in that's perfectly healthy, and then there are 5 people that need organs. This person is a perfect match for all 5 of those people. Are you willing to kill that one person in order to save the other 5 lives? Will you murder one person and then but know for a fact, or know beyond reasonable doubt, etc., that you are that you're going to save 5 lives? So the marginal utility, right, the net utility is that 5 people live one way and one person dies, or one person dies or 5 people die and one person lives. So we can do this in a much less charitable way. Like the penny example is designed to evoke a response, right? That this person is a monster. And what I'm saying is that you don't get to justify theft and murder or rape or any of these other forms of aggression against people at all. And I doubt that your example actually matches reality of the world. And the real answer is, I'll finish. The real answer is you should approach this problem most likely like a virtue ethicist. And what you should do is you should do everything to fight whatever fucking monster or evil is about to kill 7 billion people and not engage in some form of theft. Or if you're a fucking criminal and you do it, you must pay restitution and recompensation afterwards.
Finding out how to combat what's about to kill 7 billion people is obviously going to involve a bit of theft. Okay, so like, do we know if any action is ethical if we don't 100% know it in the first place? Like, obviously, epistemologically, there's ambiguity. So
I don't think, as far as I can tell, I'm not sure that you can know that a decision is ethically justifiable. What I think you can do, right, is the law of non-contradiction, right? And what you can do is you can determine that some things are unjustifiable, right? And thus you can determine that the opposite of said thing is always justifiable, but there's a range of choices within opposites often, right? So for example, if I can prove, for example, that like murder is wrong, for example, right? If we can prove that murder is wrong, we can contradict that murder is wrong. What that means is not murdering is justifiable, but there's a lot of things one can do that are also not murdering.
Okay, just explain the nuance and the circumstances. Then, in a lot of instances, I'd be down with murder. But I mean, when we're talking murder,
I can use your own logic, right? Your own positions, which I believe are unjustifiable, right? So, do you believe, like, assuming murder, not killing, murder is wrong? Everything that is not murdering is then like justified in some regard, right? Unless there's some other form of contradiction, right? There's a range of things. Engaging in the labor market would be one of those things that is not murdering, and you would say that that is wrong, right? So what I mean to say is that, like, we can objectively
does not make the choice free.
Right, but you say that about quite literally everything. So it's a meaningless thing. You're saying that about the nature of reality. And then what you're doing is you're attempting to judge morality. Right, but you're trying to escape the nature of reality by then creating a post-scarcity fantasy world and putting your moral framework in the post-scarcity fantasy world as a means of being able to attempt to justify the situation.
Okay, but you're basing your morality in a pre-scarcity, fantasy world in which literally everything is determined by contract, agreement, whatever. And I just think
no, I'm not.
System can exist.
My system is literally exists in a system of scarcity. What are you talking about? Like that's just you attempting to meme and failing.
Scarcity, scarcity. Sure.
If you can't walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, don't try and like mimic my hand movements and say dumb shit. Like, just try and make a good argument. If you can't meme, it's okay. Not all of us are good at it.
You said I was a slaver, but you're worse than Hitler because you wouldn't steal a penny to save the world. I mean, come on, man. Like, obviously, I believe some instances of coercion are justified, and you clearly do because, like,
we literally got to the "you're worse than Hitler." I love it. So I'm worse than Hitler because I won't steal, and I said that what you should do is attempt to fight whatever evil is trying to kill the world, as opposed to give in to evil. So here's the funny little thing. No. Let me defeat this analogy for you again. Because apparently in order to get shit, you need to have shit defeated like 6 ways from Sunday, and then you eventually give up and move forward. So let me defeat this a second way. Let's look at this from a game theory perspective. See, when you isolate something and you say steal, right? No. Listen. Right? When you isolate something as steal a penny to save the world, right? In that moment, what you're doing is you're creating a snapshot decision. And you're saying it's justified to engage in theft instead of fighting evil. See, the problem with that is what happens when your world is set upon the rules of the idea that it is justifiable to steal for the benefit of, for a larger presumed benefit. As you run that game over and over and over again, what you get is a world where it's constantly justifiable to steal for the subjective analysis of individuals to presumably better others. What you get is theft over and over and over again, and you get unjustifiable positions over and over and over again, and you live in not the utopia of post-scarcity, but the dystopia. So there's another way your analogy is defeated that you tried to use to circumnavigate argumentation ethics.
You're extrapolating way too much into a simple hypothetical. That's like I said.
No, I'm literally running. I'm
like medical bed hypothetical. Okay, well, we can actually develop stem cell research that would make us grow synthetic organs that they can use. But I just need to contend with the hypothetical, and that's like completely.
I'm maintaining the principal elements and then reiterating those in society. You're just lying right now.
No, you're not. No, you're not. Because you're saying.
Well, if you're not lying, then you're not smart enough to get what like game like reiterating it over and over again does, right? Like it's just another means by which to test the logic.
Another means by which to test the. No, okay.
When you say something is morally justifiable, right? That must be a universal. Moral propositional claims must be universal. And say so you must be able to universalize them. So if you universalize your moral propositional claim that it is morally justified to do something, right? In order to save people from your subjective analysis, and I test that, right? Then what you're saying is one of two things: that either this is a false moral claim, or you're saying that this moral claim, for whatever reason, only exists in this specific set of circumstances, and now I need to define what are the parameters of those circumstances that are different from the moral claim itself.
Okay, so what I was trying to say, that you're introducing an entirely new circumstance which wasn't present in the original hypothetical. So again, that's like saying, okay, well, we need to develop synthetic organs so the people actually get the organs they need and the original corpse isn't harmed. But okay, I still have to contend with what's strictly in the hypothetical. How do you justify not stealing so the world dies? Like, okay, I would definitely steal that penny because Bezos can clearly afford to pay for that, okay?
I already told you that in such an extreme position that doesn't match reality, that it's very possible that I would do it.
Either does
right?
the organ hypothetical.
Right. But the situation, right? But the situation is as such that what one should morally do is not steal. That you should attempt to fight this system, or you should do whatever it is the hell you want. I mean, fuck it. The world's fucking ending unless you steal this penny. Like maybe the fucking world's gone. I don't know.
That's why we can morally justify it from a utilitarian standpoint. Somehow can't, because apparently objectivity or whatever.
Okay, so again, I'm gonna go through this again, right? But I'm gonna do it in an example so that you can maybe your brain can understand it. Universalize this. The claim is, right? The claim is that it is okay to steal something that somebody owns, right? In order to save other people's lives. That this is a moral good that you have a moral imperative to do, correct?
Yes.
Presuming, I'm going to even give you a caveat, presuming that the theft does not kill other people, right? That there's a net gain in life, right? That you can't steal food out of a baby's mouth and like kill the baby to like save somebody else, like right there, right? Presuming that there's a net benefit. So if we universalize this, what you're saying is that America needs to pay a 90% tax rate so that we can make sure that African children don't starve, and that we're allowed to take everything from America and give it to Africa so long as that actually saves the starving children. And tomorrow we just need a 90% tax rate effective.
I would take any caliber of that bullet fired any day of the week, yes. Like, obviously, this is a clear and total bullet bite. But, you know, I think humanity transcends nationality, so of course, I would, you know, tax the shit out of Bezos for some starving African children. Of course, it's the necessarily moral thing to do. Sorry, I'm bad with words.
Right. So you would like, do you realize what you're biting the bullet on, right? Like you're biting the bullet on the idea that you can steal as much as you want, so long as your subjective analysis proves to you and your opinion. Like you're basically saying, like, shut up, get into the gulag. Like, you know, how many people would you enslave? How many people would you?
Taxation is equatable to a gulag.
I think taxation is theft, and it's a form of slavery. I think a gulag is kidnapping, and it's a form of. What? Gulag is forced labor, right?
Labor.
Taxation is theft.
Subsistence labor is forced labor. Like, obviously,
right? But all work is forced. I know you already stated that you believe that the reason the moral impetus you have for denying an objective analysis of morality is that you believe that everything is aggression, everything is evil, and everything is coercive. And then what we can, since we do that, we can do a universal, we can do a utilitarian analysis later.
Later, sure, fine. I can go at 8:57, just so you know, just letting you know.
Eastern Standard Time?
At EST.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm fine with that. It's okay. Did you want to make like a closing statement then? Because we're kind of stuck on the seal of penny, like philosophical window. Like I want to give you an opportunity to like surmise your points. And if you want me to go first, I'll go first since you're a guest and I've been hounding you.
I'll go first if you want me to. So
either way, your choice.
Okay. So the reason I think Fabian's system is inferior is because there's still a clear and present element of coercion in people's lives there. This being labor. I wanted to do with that to get to a post-scarcity world, and in a post-scarcity world, we in our human lives can focus on what we would like to do and what we would want to do, rather than being preoccupied with what we would rather not be doing. So, yeah, I think coercion is definitely justified in that instance. Obviously, coercion is like definitionally ambiguous, but obviously it's highly justified. Obviously, I totally like rip apart Jeff Bezos' net worth to save the planet. Additionally, I'd tax George Soros to, you know, give to a few more African kids. I think those are perfectly analogous. So yeah, I generally think that, well, not generally, but almost universally, think that ANCOM will generate a greater utility by not forcing us to work. I just want to know how FL epistemologically justifies like these rigid standards of not stealing.
Okay,
I guess I'm more nuanced than him. Like, he really likes to keep things stringent. Go ahead.
Yeah, nuance is the devil's in the details with that nuance, isn't it? The devil is certainly in the details when commies talk about nuance. But anyways, yeah, I think that the idea that that positive rights exist and that they are, for whatever reason, more important than negative rights is a contradiction in terms, because positive rights require that you violate people's negative rights, but respecting negative rights does not require that you violate any positive rights, unless, of course, by saying that it violates those positive rights, you must then violate the other right. So with positive rights, a rights violation is always present. With negative rights, it is not present unless you subscribe to a positive rights philosophy, which then creates a never-ending cycle of rights violations that is impossible to maintain. And so logically, the only position that one can hold is that of negative rights. You do not have a right to someone else's labor. You do not have a right to someone else's work. You do not have a right to someone else's property. But when you say that people have a right to food or a right to certain standards of living and that they must be provided, that's exactly what you're doing. You're demanding other people work for you and you're enslaving them in some capacity, which is what my opponent said multiple times, which is that you do not have a right not to work, which is a right you do have in a capitalist system, even if it's stupid. I would also say that, the idea of getting rid of capitalism as an innovative force towards post-scarcity is the most ridiculous thing that one could ever do. Oh, did he dip out?
Oh, I'm not gone yet.
Oh, you just cut off your camera. Oh, okay. Oh, sure. I was like, yeah, what the fuck? I would also say that the way that capitalism works is that it combines this idea of labor and land. And that the capitalist is the individual that gives the monies, gives the investment towards the time preference against the universal time preference. And by virtue of the incentive structure of profit for the proper allocation of resources, this is the way that the supply and demand equation allows us to be able to create cheaper and better products and services, etc. But what is occurring, right, in this other system is that there isn't that same incentive other than people's desires in this place where they have to work, but they can choose to work on whatever it is they work. But don't worry, it'll be post-scarcity. It's engaged in utopia, and it's not really following economic principles. Lastly, I would say that when you attempt to redefine words like labor and work and time and morally justified and coercion and aggression, you begin to see that someone doesn't have an argument. When they need to constantly try and use your own terminology against you and rephrase those words to try and fit their own kind of utopic analysis, you realize that what they're really trying to do is subvert. And, that's the dialectic process, like, at its best. And that's why I think that subjectivism, postmodernism, Marxism, neo-Marxism, anarcho-communism, and all of these things that are based in that consequentialist, subjectivist analysis are acts of evil that are designed to philosophically poison the well and turn everyone poor and destroy our society.
You believe in natural rights, right? Are you done?
Yeah, I believe in natural law. There you go. Those are closing statements.
That would have been the much better debate to have, because we can really get into the nitty gritty of the epistemology.
Yeah, we could have talked about Bakunin and what is authority and things like that. And yeah.
That's for another time. I plan on DMing Zulu about that, but feel free to talk to me.
Hey, feel free to debate Zulu. Just know that I am way nicer than Zulu. Zulu's going to pin you to the fucking wall and like demand that you not change the words of anything. I let you get away with a lot. Zulu goes hard. Just warning you.
Right. Sure. All right. Well, I feel like this has been pretty constructive. Obviously, I feel like we went in circles, but I think it was net good nonetheless. Fabian, take care. And so the rest of the ANCAPs out there, have fun, I guess.
All right, brother.
All right. See you.
You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.